You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Tim Walklate, and today I'm hosting a discussion on homophobia in sport, both on the pitch and in the stands. In recent years, basketball, rugby and cricket have all seen high-profile stars come out as homosexuals. But the world's most popular sport, football, currently doesn't have a single top-flight professional who's openly gay. Anton Huyssen, who plays in the Swedish third division, comes closest. In Britain, the former Norwich City and Nottingham Forest footballer Justin Fashanu revealed that he was gay in 1990, but Fashanu suffered years of discrimination and ended up committing suicide in 1998 after a 17-year-old American boy alleged that the football star had sexually assaulted him. Meanwhile, a recent National Union of Students survey has revealed that less than 40% of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender students who play organised sport at university are open about their sexuality with their teammates. So is progress being made in combating homophobia in sport, or is it an issue that is simply not being addressed? Today I'm joined in the studio by Andrew Warshaw, Chief Football Reporter for Inside World Football, and Chris Basiewski, Chair of the Gay Football Supporters Network, and on the phone by Tony Fennick, Co-Chair for Schools Out and LGBT History Month. Thank you all for coming. I'd first like to ask you all very briefly, how serious a problem is homophobia in sport? Chris?
Well, I think homophobia, certainly worldwide, is still a problem in society in general. But because we always look through things in the microcosm of sport, we can see it highlighted there in a much bigger way. Now, our own organisation, the Gay Football Supporters Network, was really set up as a way to help like-minded people meet each other, but we also like to provide a safe haven within the game for people to come, be out, be open, and be safe while they do so. And that's really the key. We probably wouldn't exist if homophobia didn't exist. We're there not just as a social network, but actually to make a point amongst ourselves, actually, yes, that our sexuality isn't really very important to our ability to play the game, but we need to exist to provide that safe haven. And that's why we work with the footballing authorities to try and eradicate homophobia in sport and in football. And you'll note that currently, certainly in the UK, but there's no out professional male player. And it's been like that for some time.
Andrew?
As far as I'm concerned, to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure. Now, there's several reasons why I'm not sure. One, maybe because I'm heterosexual and therefore I don't have the experience and knowledge of those who have a greater experience of this subject than me in terms of being able to delve into exactly how big a problem it is. But I suspect, more importantly, because it's quite possible that the gay community have almost been silent, stroke gagged in terms of coming out for fear of the very thing that we've seen in racism over the last few months, hitting them hard. And I'm not sure which one of those two is correct, but certainly I wouldn't be at all surprised if, given what we've had in the UK, at least on the racism side, that this subject isn't the next big subject to, forgive the pun, to come out, because I'm convinced there are hundreds, if not thousands, of the gay community, male and female, who simply haven't come out and admitted it in sport because of the fear of being persecuted. And if that's the case, it's appalling. And the NUS report that I've studied makes for quite sobering reading, actually. 37.8 people saying they're not open about their sexuality with their teammates. That really sums up what I've just said.
But I guess it's also what Chris pointed out. It is a more wider societal problem. You said, you're heterosexual, but it does affect, it's everywhere, really. I'm a Watford fan. Watford, famously owned by Elton John once upon a time. And there have been homophobic chants directed at Watford fans in the past. Graham Lasseau, he's heterosexual and was subjected to quite serious homophobic chanting in the past. So it is a wider problem that seems to affect quite a lot of people.
Can I add Brighton to that? Brighton, Hove Albion supporters, have been experiencing quite vile homophobic abuse for about 15 years now, and we've been working with the supporters club down at Brighton to see what we can do about it. But I'm quite convinced that if any of the chanting was racist of nature, clubs would have found stadiums closed down, points deducted, heavy fines imposed. But because it's on a homophobic level, the football authorities don't actually know what to do and sticking their heads in the sand about it.
Given it's very interesting what Chris is saying, because Brighton, if I'm not mistaken, and again, forgive me if I am mistaken, but Brighton is one of the very strong gay communities, not just of the South, but of the whole country, and therefore maybe I'm sure there is a link between that and what Chris has just said. But going back to your point about Graham Lasso, he's not the only one. I've watched football for 40 years, and I can tell you the whispers and innuendos and comments that have no basis in fact are pretty prevalent at football matches, not just in the Premier League, but throughout the professional game. And actually, it doesn't matter whether Graham Lasso is gay or whether he isn't gay. The problem is these sort of very unpleasant kind of whispers that you get around the stands saying, oh, did you know he's gay? Did you know he's got a relationship with X or Y? And, that must put a lot of people off in terms of actually coming out and saying, well, yes, I am. And I do have a relationship with X or Y. If I wasn't gay, would you be saying these things? And I think that is really pivotal to the debate. And it's something I find extremely disconcerting.
Tony, how serious a problem is homophobia in sport?
To give you a bit of background, it's Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Trans History Month, which we hold in the UK every February. We celebrate the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people from history to try to give young people role models and to tell us that, there are lots of lesbians, gays, bisexual and trans people out there, LGBT people we call them for short, and that they've lived very long lives and some of them have done some tremendous things. Because visibility is the key. We've got to make our communities visible. And what we do every year is we change our subject area and we talk about a different area of the curriculum to come into schools. And we focused on sport for 2 years because we knew it would take 2 years to shake the tree, if you like, and make people aware of the existence of homophobia and transphobia in sport. And my goodness, what a lot we found. First of all, at elite level, where people are performing professionally, there's pressure to stay in the closet because obviously people have publicity deals, they have advertising deals, they make a lot of money out of promoting goods. And if they came out, there could be difficulties there. Also, of course, they might be competing in countries where homosexual acts are illegal, so they've got to be very careful about that. One of the reasons that John Amici, the famous basketball player, didn't come out during his professional career was because there are states in the United States of America where he wouldn't have been able to play at the time. Then at the lower levels, of course, at the street level, I should say, you've got the pressure at schools, you've got the sledging culture, where people insult each other on the basis of, they face the other side. You've got the changing room, locker room culture, which can be very cruel indeed, which is a haven for bullies and bullying. So at both levels and in all sports arenas, there is an enormous amount of homophobia and transphobia to conquer. I think we've started a process that we've got to continue and see through to its fruition.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Tim Walklate, and today I'm hosting a discussion on homophobia in sport, both on the pitch and in the stands.
Can I ask Tony and Chris a question? Why is it that politicians freely come out and say they're gay and actually, almost perversely, gain more respect rather than less respect from the general public for doing so, but sport is totally closeted in this area? What's the reason for that?
I think there's many reasons. I think one of them is particularly a misconception, certainly on the men's side, that gay men and team sports don't mix. And that's a perception that both the LGBT community has had as well as the mainstream society. My view on a professional level, from a professional game point of view, that players' careers are short. Anytime private lives become focus of media attention and people find themselves on the front cover rather than the back cover, it tends to detract in the short term from people's careers, and I don't think anybody's been willing to take that risk yet, thinking keeping their head down has been able to them to concentrate on what's their most important thing for them, and that's playing. Now, you may argue that coming out would lift a weight off the shoulders, which in the long term would make them play better. But that theory could also be completely wrong because no retired player has come out yet. I'm still waiting for somebody to write a book. It would be a bestseller, but they haven't done it yet. And I can't understand why that hasn't happened yet.
Also, we're talking about, aren't we, primarily the UK. I wonder whether in countries that perhaps in Europe are not as liberal-minded as we are here, how much further back would they be in terms of developing this area, given that gay communities in some countries are not just in sport, but in every way. They're just not known because of I guess, fear and prejudice. I mean, that's a huge worry, isn't it?
We've made strong representations to FIFA about how safe our members going to the World Cups in both Russia and Qatar are going to be. In Russia recently, we've seen a big crackdown on the LGBT community where our members wouldn't feel safe, but at least it'd be legal over there. In Qatar, you could be thrown in prison. The penalties for being gay over there are severe. And if you're going to take in a major international tournament like that, how can you make it safe?
Fascinating.
Well, I think what I'd also like to bring in is Justin Fashanu. I mean, I think he's a major reason for why so many footballers haven't come out.
Justin Fashanu had many, many demons. His sexuality was just one of them. But we always say we wouldn't never want anybody to come out. We want to create an atmosphere in football or in sport where they can come out if they want to. The thing with that is if somebody comes out and they're a good, positive role model, then that could take us forward a massive step. But if they seem to be having difficulties, if they're not well received, and they find themselves in the gossip columns more than on the back pages, then that's actually going to push it back. And Justin Fashanu was 25 years ago now, and sport hasn't really moved on from that and learned how to deal with it.
When you mentioned politicians, it was interesting because I can remember in the 1980s when Maureen Corcoran came out as a lesbian, there was immediately kicked out of the Labour Party. And Peter Tatchell campaigned for the Labour Party in Bermondsey and was mocked tirelessly and basically destroyed by the media and by his fellow politicians as well. And it's only recently that politics has become a safe haven for people to come out. And I think visibility is the key. When the first professional footballer does come out, it'll be all over the front pages. It'll be a big brouhaha. But then once other people start to come in behind him and come out of the closet as well, they will become visible and football will become a safer arena. But I'm also reminded, of course, that one of the things that we did when we were campaigning about sports and dealing with the Football Association, a lot of people were saying, why can't we get rid of homophobia in football the way we got rid of racism? And then a lot of people turned around and said, hang on a minute, when did you get rid of racism in football? And now, of course, you found out that racism is rife in parts of Central and Eastern Europe, and racism is rife in many of our clubs now, including some of the professional players. And that's been on the front pages recently as well. So we've opened a big can of worms there. And I don't think we're quite as liberal and open-minded and as good on equal opportunities as we like to think ourselves sometimes.
To use a fairly weak sporting pun, I guess that in terms of raising awareness of racism, that's kind of in the Premier League, as I said to Andrew earlier. The issue of homophobia in football is kind of Conference North. It's so far behind in comparison to racism. I mean, you said earlier, Andrew, it's about, first of all, there needs to be a footballer to come out openly as a homosexual, and then secondly to raise awareness of it. So it's almost twofold.
I disagree with that.
Yeah?
I think it's the gay. We would never presume to ask anybody to come out. We would never presume to say to somebody they should put their head above the parapet. If it happens and it works out fine, that would be absolutely fantastic. But we, in the game, or those of us who like the game, need to make sure that the environment in the game is ready for when somebody does that. And that seems to be the first point. When it comes to the Premier League and it comes to the other football authorities, it's very clear to us, having spoken to them for many years now, that the word homophobia isn't something that they're comfortable with, and it's something they know a great deal about. And what we're trying to actually do is come back to basics and actually get everybody around the table and say, we want to come up with a common understanding of what do we actually mean by homophobia. Where is the line between banter and abuse? And for us, it's very, very simple. If you take out the word that's gay-related and replace it with a word that's race-related, would that be acceptable? In almost every circumstance, the answer is no, and there's your answer. But because the game is almost not willing to talk about it at that level, and the Premier League are very happy to sit down on our table, and the stumbling block is actually getting everybody in, teaching them in a way that this is actually quite a really simple issue, and it could be dealt with really simply, but there's a massive, massive block. And breaking that block down is the hard thing.
Do you know whether there are gay footballers in the professional game in the UK, or do we turn it on its head and say, well, actually, there may not be, because of the very concept of the fact that team sports and professional footballers don't go together?
There clearly are. We've had anecdotal evidence for many years, but the best evidence we've got really right now is recently we carried an interview on our website with Clark Carlisle, who is the chair of the Professional Footballers Association, the Players Union. And he says that 8 players who are gay have approached him as the chair of the PFA and talked about coming out. And of those 8, 7 of them have blamed the media reaction for being or the perceived media reaction for being the reason they haven't been able to come out. So the chair of the PFA has spoken personally to 8 players in the professional league who are gay. We've spoken to people over the years. We know they exist. We've never asked them to come out, but we know they're there, and we want to work for them to get to the point where people like them would be happy to speak out.
Do you think their teammates know?
Some of them do.
Yeah.
We know that anecdotally. We know that some within the teams are aware of them. They're only not out to the public. And you know what? Why should they be? I've long since dismissed the notion that professional football players are role models. They're not. They're football players.
Mike Clifford, I think, said that there were several players in the Premier League who were gay, and he advised them not to come out because they would lose money on their sponsorship deals, and it would be, laid on the altar and sacrificed by the media as well. So I think there's a lot of pressure there. And another thing is, of course, a lot of people are partially out. That is to say, they're out to their friends and their family, but not out to the general public or out to the media. And probably the media knows about it in some cases as well. So, you've got to take those things into account. So it's a more complicated thing. I'd like to shift, if possible, over to the idea of the Olympics. I mean, in the Olympics, we had 6 gay and lesbian participants this year, and out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that represented Great Britain. So again, there's a very, very small number being represented. I think some of them might be in the closet, but I also think that, of course, sport is not a very welcoming environment for LGBT people when they're at school. There's the locker room culture, the changing room culture. There's the insults. Team sports were an anathema to me when I was at school. I didn't dare go into football and rugby. So there will be a smaller number participating of LGBT people than there is in the wider community. You need to make sport a safer environment. And there is, of course, the LGBT Sports Charter, which all the professional sports have signed up to now, including the Football Association, where they have pledged to make their sport a safe and welcoming environment for LGBT people as participants and as spectators. And that's something that we need to make them stick to and make them do something about.
What's quite interesting, Tony, is that I've got several gay friends who are as obsessed by football as I am as a supporter.
Yeah.
But they never played it, probably for the reasons that you've just mentioned.
Exactly.
When I came out at university in 97, I was 18, 19 years old, and I was speaking to gay people for the first time, and I tried to talk to them about sport, football in particular. I also tried to talk to them about the music I liked, the latest Star Wars film that was coming out, and I was astounded to be told, taken to one side by one of them and said, "Chris, you're gay now, you've got to drop these ridiculous straight obsessions." So even within the LGBT community at the time, there was a perception that team sports don't want us and we don't want them. Now, one of the things I'm most proud of with the work that we've done at the GFSN and groups like us, and certainly I would count Schools Out and LGBT History Month in that, is that the LGBT community now are comfortable with the idea of us taking part in sports. They might not want to join us. Certainly in this country, there's no longer the look of surprise and horror that we exist.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Tim Walklate, and today I'm hosting a discussion on homophobia in sport, both on the pitch and in the stands. Today I'm joined in the studio by Andrew Warshaw, chief football reporter for Inside World Football, and Chris Basiurski, chair of the Gay Football Supporters Network, and on the phone by Tony Fennick, co-chair for Schools Out and LGBT History Month. You said that there needs to be a homosexual to come out in football. You don't think that's essential?
I think that is one of the end games rather than the starting point. I think getting to that position where somebody feels comfortable in coming out means that that sport has gone a long way to making them welcome. Now, we may get there right now, but it's a big, big ask, and we would never ask that. Of course, if somebody did come out and they were a really positive role model, it would be fantastic for the game and for society. But we can't sit back and wait for that. We've actually got to do the work now to make sure it happens. Now, there are some good initiatives out there. The PFA have been knocked a lot recently, but they're working with the police to come with some internal football protocols that if somebody does come out, say they're outed in the media or they decide to come out on a whim over a weekend, but before they next have to take a pitch, the relevant people are sitting around a table before their next game, they're talking to the local police, they're talking to the teams, they're talking to the managers, coaches, the stewards, to make sure that the next time that person steps onto the pitch, they are well looked after. And that, for me, is when it comes out, that'll be brilliant.
Well, since Gareth Thomas came out in rugby, Stephen Davis came out in cricket, John Amici in basketball, would you say that attitudes have shifted in those respective sports?
I don't know. I'm a cricket fan, and I think there was a worry that Stephen Davis wasn't getting picked for England because of his coming out. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that he's not quite good enough to take Matt Pryor's place, but I'm hoping he'll get there one day. Gareth Thomas has really... he came out towards the end of his career, and he then switched coaches to rugby league, and it highlighted problems in rugby league as well. But these are steps, The fact that we can name them, it shows how few of them there are.
Tony, would you agree with that?
Yes, we need to be proactive rather than reactive. We need to remember that at very, very many levels we need to do work. I mean, I hear things about youth clubs where, the leader of a youth club, an amateur football club that takes place after school is shouting out homophobic comments to the kids across the pitch. This kind of thing still goes on, and that's another thing that we need to challenge. As I say, we campaigned on sport for 2 years, and with certain sports, particularly rugby union, and rugby league, and with cricket, we found that we were knocking at an open door. We've had our last 2 pre-launches at the Oval Cricket Ground and at Twickenham, respectively. And we have had a lot of support, including Sheffield Eagles running around and having a game, which unfortunately they lost, I have to concede, wearing our uniforms with homophobia tackled in and Schools Out logo on their shirts. So there's been a lot of support there and a lot of proactive work, but we need to get it to work right across the board. Can I move one thing on, which is we're talking an awful lot about gay men coming out and gay men coming out and so on and so forth. We've also got an issue. There are very, very few women, sportswomen, coming out as lesbian in the sports arena, even though we know that there must be quite a large number of them. So there's obviously pressure coming from there as well. And again, I think this might come from the possibility of losing sponsorship deals, possibly losing places on teams and so on and so forth.
Ian Roberts was the rugby player in Australia. He found his endorsements going up when he came out, and he became... that it really showed for him. On the women's game, it's actually a good point. That what we're finding is that it's a slightly different angle. If gay men in team sports weren't expected to mix, there's a perception in if you're a woman involved in team sports, then you're more likely to be a lesbian, and so there's a different emphasis going on there, which is of course as much of a myth as it is the other way around. But I think that's another misconception that comes out that makes it more difficult for people to be open as they are and be who they are.
There's a very interesting twist to this, Chris, from what you've just said, because if what you're saying is true, Tony, then why, wrongly of course, but nevertheless, it is almost de rigueur on the women's golf circuit and to some extent on the women's tennis circuit that, without a shred of evidence, but nevertheless, the innuendos are always there that a considerable number of them, if not the majority, are gay. So how do we square that with the suggestion that there are perhaps even fewer lesbians playing in professional team sport than there are male homosexuals?
I think the premise to start with is to say there aren't more lesbians involved in golf or tennis than there are straight people. I think that's just people pluck out of the air.
Why?
There are some very high profile lesbian tennis players, or there have been over the years, and I think.
But that's good, isn't it?
It's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. But what it does actually, from their point of view, and it's hard to talk from the woman's point of view, not being a woman, is that because there's a perception that they may be lesbians, they feel that there's more pressure for them not to say anything because their straight colleagues are finding themselves under pressure, whereas in a straight man playing football isn't likely to get pressure on this. They can, people like Graham So can get pressure on it, but it's less likely, whereas it's much more of a pressure for women, so that across the board it's become more of a difficult issue.
You don't think, either of you, you don't think that there is a perception that it is more acceptable, quote unquote, amongst their peers that women golfers and women tennis players, I can't talk for the other sports because I haven't heard any suggestion that they have a gay community as well, but are you saying that it should or shouldn't be more acceptable a gay woman plays tennis and golf than a gay man?
There are very few lesbian tennis players or golf players who are professional and are openly gay or lesbian. Most of them are in the closet, and a lot of them are assumed to be, and that's based on stereotype. And I think you can probably trace that back to the old school stereotypes that we had when we were at school, the idea of the gym mistress who was a closet lesbian, and the PE teacher, the male PE teacher, who of course was quite the reverse. He was, half a male. But again, I don't think there are that many who are out, and I don't think there's... I think what you're doing is basically working on a perception based on a stereotype.
Chris,
I was going to say, I was exactly going to say the same thing. I think the perception is a stereotype, but Tony made the point.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I'd like to ask you all very finally, will homosexuality ever be acceptable in sport?
Yes, absolutely. Certainly looking at this country, we're probably much closer than we are in other countries, but when I look around the world, I look at particularly Russia and Qatar, where it's coming up in a big way. I think that society has to be brought along before sport is going to be where we need it to be.
Andrew?
I don't know, but what I wonder is whether is it the human contact or is it the dressing room culture that is preventing this? And I don't understand why, if it's neither of those things, I use the phrase again, it's almost de rigueur for the acting profession, for the music profession, to have a considerable number of gay men and women. What's the problem with sport? Why can't sport embrace the same thing?
Tony?
Yes, it will. It'll take hard work on the part of a lot of activists, but it will happen. It will take place, and it will have an impact, I think, not just on the nation, but on the world. We had, anybody who heard the cheer that went up when Barack Obama said his presidential speech, and he said, able-bodied and disabled, the American dream is for everybody, and then he said gay and straight, and you heard the cheer went up, and you see that the world's changing, and sport has to change with it. It will happen. Football will probably be the last sports discipline to fall in line, but it will happen, and I look forward to being around when it does.
Well, that seems like a good place to finish. You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Tim Walklate, and today I've been hosting a discussion on homophobia in sport, both on the pitch and in the stands. Today I was joined in the studio by Andrew Warshaw, Chief Football Reporter for Inside World Football, and Chris Basiewski, Chair of the Gay Football Supporters Network, and on the phone by Tony Fennick, Co-Chair for Schools Out and LGBT History Month.
Haven't come out and admitted it in sport because of the fear of being persecuted, and if that's the case, it's appalling. And the NUS report that I've studied makes for quite sobering reading, actually. 37.8 people saying they're not open about their sexuality with their teammates. That really sums up what I've just said.
But I guess it's also what Chris pointed out. It is a more wider societal problem. You said, you're heterosexual, but it does affect, it's everywhere, really. I'm a Watford fan. Watford, famously owned by Elton John once upon a time. And there have been homophobic chants directed at Watford fans in the past. Graham Lasseau, he's heterosexual and was subjected to quite serious homophobic chanting in the past. So it is a wider problem that seems to affect quite a lot of people.
Can I add Brighton to that? Brighton, Hove Albion supporters have been a microcosm of sport. We can see it highlighted there in a much bigger way. Now, our own organisation, the Gay Football Supporters Network, was really set up as a way to help like-minded people meet each other, but we also like to provide a safe haven within the game for people to come, be out, be open, and be safe while they do so. And that's really the key. We probably wouldn't exist if homophobia didn't exist. We're there not just as a social network, but actually to make a point amongst ourselves that actually, yes, that our sexuality isn't really very important to our ability to play the game, but we need to exist to provide that safe haven. And that's why we work with the footballing authorities to try and eradicate homophobia in sport and in football. And you'll note that currently, certainly in the UK, but there's no out professional male player. And it's been like that for some time.
Andrew?
As far as I'm concerned, to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure. Now, there's several reasons why I'm not sure.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Tim Walklate, and today I'm hosting a discussion on homophobia in sport, both on the pitch and in the stands. In recent years, basketball, rugby and cricket have all seen high-profile stars come out as homosexuals. But the world's most popular sport, football, currently doesn't have a single top-flight professional who's openly gay. Anton Huyssen, who plays in the Swedish third division, comes closest. In Britain, the former Norwich City and Nottingham Forest footballer Justin Fashanu revealed that he was gay in 1990, but Fashanu suffered years of discrimination and ended up committing suicide in 1998 after a 17-year-old American boy alleged that the football star had sexually assaulted him. Meanwhile, a recent National Union...
One, maybe because I'm heterosexual and therefore I don't have the experience and knowledge of those who have a greater experience of this subject than me in terms of being able to delve into exactly how big a problem it is. But I suspect, more importantly, because it's quite possible that the gay community have almost been silent, stroke gagged in terms of coming out for fear of the very thing that we've seen in racism over the last few months hitting them hard. And I'm not sure which one of those two is correct, but certainly I wouldn't be at all surprised if, given what we've had in the UK, at least on the racism side, that this subject isn't the next big subject to, forgive the pun, to come out, because I'm convinced there are hundreds, if not thousands, of the gay community, male and female, who simply...
The Students Survey has revealed that less than 40% of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender students who play organised sport at university are open about their sexuality with their teammates. So is progress being made in combating homophobia in sport, or is it an issue that is simply not being addressed? Today I'm joined in the studio by Andrew Warshaw, Chief Football Reporter for Inside World Football, and Chris Basiewski, Chair of the Gay Football Supporters Network, and on the phone by Tony Fennick, Co-Chair for Schools Out and LGBT History Month. Thank you all for coming. I'd first like to ask you all very briefly, how serious a problem is homophobia in sport? Chris?
Well, I think homophobia, certainly worldwide, is still a problem in society in general. But because we always look through things in a